Good morning, Intro to Cinema. This is Sarah Risha here with today's video on The Incredibles. The Incredibles was a 2004 computer-animated superhero film written and directed by Brad Bird. It was produced by Pixar, but released by Disney. This was prior to Disney's acquisition of Pixar. In fact, this was the film that started off that process, though I won't go into any more details here. Brad Bird is an American director, screenwriter, animator, producer, and voice actor. He was part of the first graduating class of the California Institute for the Arts. For those who don't know, Cal Arts opened in 1961 and was the first degree-granting institution of higher learning in the United States created specifically for students of both the visual and the performing arts. Many of Disney and Pixar's top animators graduated from here, and Walt Disney himself was even on staff for a time. Some of you may know the A113 Easter egg that shows up in almost every Pixar film. This number refers to a classroom number for the Introduction to Animation course. The Incredibles was Brad Bird's second time directing a film. The first film he directed was the 1999 film The Iron Giant. This film was a box office flop, making about $31 million worldwide against a budget of $70 to $80 million. The Iron Giant's failure was blamed primarily on its unusually poor marketing campaign. It has since become a modern animated classic in its own right. It was nominated for 7 awards, winning 9 Annie Awards out of 15 nominations. The Incredibles was Pixar's first film starring an all-human cast. Bird and most of his crew were traditionally 2D animators swapping over to 3D animation, while the staff at Pixar was exclusively 3D animators. Because Bird wrote the script without knowing the limitations of 3D animation, he forced Pixar to come up with new software to accomplish what he wanted. Humans are widely considered to be the most difficult things to execute in animation, and creating an all-human cast required animating detailed human anatomy, clothing, and realistic skin and hair. There was also characters like Elastigirl, which required stretching and exaggeration of human anatomy. Although the technical team had some experience with hair and clothes in Monsters Incorporated, the amount of hair and clothes required for The Incredibles had never been attempted by Pixar. Additionally, The Incredibles was one of the longest-running films Pixar had ever attempted. One of the new animation techniques used for this film was known as surface scattering, a technique that mimics the scattering of light through translucent layers of skin. And yes, skin is translucent. If you don't believe me, try turning off the lights, turning on a flashlight, and pressing it onto your hand. Because of this technique, the skin of the characters gained a whole new level of realism. But that wasn't even considered the hardest thing to animate. According to the animation team, Violet's hair was the hardest thing to animate. Bird refused to take animation shortcuts like having her hair up in a ponytail, claiming that having her hair covering her eyes was necessary for the character. Bird once said in an interview, "Basically, I came into a wonderful studio, frightened a lot of people with how many presents I wanted for Christmas, and then got everything I asked for." Moving on to the film itself, the idea of a superhero family was a novel one, as one of the defining characteristics of the traditional Western superhero was their secret identity and hiding their powers from their friends and family. Think the original Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. This wasn't the case worldwide, as in Japan, superheroes were often depicted as teams. Think Power Rangers. And there were exceptions, like the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, but overwhelmingly, superhero films of the day were focused on the hero's struggle to balance their 2 lives while hiding from their family. An animated superhero film was also considered a novelty. Heroes up until this point were known primarily through comic books or TV series, and there were very few hero movies. Most of the hero films at the time were live action. In fact, Pixar had actually suggested that The Incredibles be a live action movie, but Bird refused. The combination of superhero and spy elements was also a novelty. Nowadays, with characters like Nick Fury and the Black Widow, it's hard to imagine heroes and spies as separate genres, but this wasn't really something that had been explored at the time. On to questions to consider. Number 1. The Incredibles broke the Western superhero mold. So, which did you find more interesting? Did you prefer the dysfunctional superhero family or the brooding solo hero? Number 2. One of the appeals of The Incredibles is its relatable family dynamics. For me, the moment that really grounded the film was when Helen explains to Violet and Dash exactly what is at stake when donning the hero identity, instead of just telling them not to play around. My mom always took the time to explain consequences when warning us not to do something, so this scene really hit home for me. How do you feel about this scene? Does it work to ground the film? What other moments grounded the film for you? Number 3. Now on to arguably my favorite part of any hero film, the villain. 3/4 of a superhero movie is determined by the villain. The villain is the one who drives the plot forward. So, what do you think about the main villain? Does Syndrome have a point? How does his mantra of when everyone is super, no one is relate to the concept of how important horses are in the Seven Samurai? And the question asked in Dr. Strangelove about, does everyone having nukes really protect anyone? Also, Syndrome may have been the main villain, but were there any other villains in this movie? List as many villains as you can find. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this movie as much as I did, and here's wishing everyone a happy finals week.